Hello, my name is Jason Demora, and welcome back to By Faith Bible Studies. Last week, we went over 1 Kings 3 through 4, looking at the kingdom of Solomon and the catalyst for that, which was his prayer to God for wisdom. A kingdom that was the greatest in Israelite history: political power, economic power, military might, all of it. And then we saw before that, 1 Kings 1 through 2, the introduction of Solomon, him coming in, and all of this being a foreshadowing to a kingdom to come, much greater than this one, the millennial kingdom ruled by Jesus Christ, the greater king, the actual fulfiller of the Davidic covenant and the Abrahamic covenant. Then we took a moment and dwelled on Micah 4 through 5, which is a prophecy both of the millennial kingdom, but also of the first advent of Jesus. For Micah 5:2, we read this: "But as for you, Bethlehem Ephrathah, too little to be among the clans of Judah, from you one will go forth for me, to be ruler in Israel. His going forths are from long ago, from the days of eternity." This idea that great God would come down and be born as a baby in a manger, and that he would come and be humbled to the cross, that he would be born in Bethlehem, the home of David, fulfilling the Davidic covenant, yet also coming as a savior first, so that he could save the lost, so that when he returns as a warrior king, he could also be a king to those who believe in him. So last week we looked at this prophecy of Christmas, this Christmas prophecy, and this week, spoilers, we're actually going to look at another one in Zechariah, but we will get there. But my problem is this: is 1 Kings 5 is just a little strange. It's at an odd spot, and I don't really know why it's there, or at least I didn't as I was studying it, but I hope I figured it out now. It's this idea that 1 Kings 6, one chapter later, begins the construction of the temple and reads thus: "Now it came about in the 480th year after the sons of Israel came out of the land of Egypt, in the 4th year of Solomon's reign over Israel, in the month of Ziv, which is the 2nd month, that he began to build the house of Yahweh." It's really this introductory sentence to a long section of Kings, this section of Solomon's life that goes from 6 to 7 to 8 all the way into chapter 9. And chapter 5 just doesn't really fit with that. Yet it also doesn't fit with the area before, because it's not talking about the introduction of Solomon's kingdom. It's talking about preparations for the temple, but it's a little odd. It's such a lengthy story with so much details, but it's a little strange. So instead of going over a large section or summarizing the construction of the temple, we're going to sit for today in 1 Kings 5. It's only about 18 verses, and we're really going to get into that. So as we read this, understanding that everything in the Bible has a purpose, everything, even the stories that we don't fully understand, let's wonder, what is the purpose of this chapter? And I hope I'm able to explain it to you in some extent. Let's read. "Now Hiram king of Tyre sent his servants to Solomon when he heard that they had anointed him king in place of his father, for Hiram had always been a friend of David. Then Solomon sent word to Hiram, saying, 'You know that David my father was unable to build a house for the name of Yahweh his God, because of the wars which surrounded him, until the Lord put them under the soles of his feet. But now Yahweh my God has given me rest on every side. There is neither adversary nor misfortune. Behold, I intend to build a house for the name of Yahweh my God, as Yahweh spoke to David my father, saying, Your son, whom I will set on your throne in your place, he will build the house for my name. Now therefore, command that they cut for me cedars from Lebanon, and my servants will be with your servants, and I will give you wages for your servants according to all that you say, for you know that there is no one among us who knows how to cut timber like the Sidonians.' When Hiram heard the words of Solomon, he rejoiced greatly and said, Blessed be Yahweh today, who has given to David a wise son over this great people. So Hiram sent word to Solomon, saying, I have heard the message which you have sent me. I will do what you desire concerning the cedar and cypress timber. My servants will bring them down from Lebanon to the sea, and I will make them in rafts to go by sea to the place where you direct me, and I will have them broken up there, and you shall carry them away. Then you shall accomplish my desire by giving food to my household. So Hiram gave Solomon as much as he desired of the cedar and cypress timber. Solomon then gave Hiram 20,000 cores of wheat as food for his household, and 20 cores of beaten oil. Thus Solomon would give Hiram year by year. Yahweh gave wisdom to Solomon just as he had promised him, and there was peace between Hiram and Solomon, and the two of them made a covenant. Now King Solomon levied forced laborers from all Israel, and the forced laborers numbered 30,000 men. He sent them to Lebanon, 10,000 a month in relays. They were in Lebanon a month, and 2 months at home, and Adoniram was over the forced laborers. Now Solomon had 70,000 transporters and 80,000 hewers of stone in the mountains, besides Solomon's 3,300 chief deputies who were over the project and who ruled over the people who were doing the work. And the king commanded, and they quarried great stones, costly stones, to lay the foundation of the house with cut stones. So Solomon's builders and Hiram's builders and the Gebuelites cut them, and prepared the timbers and the stones to build the house. This is 1 Kings 5. Let's pray. Dear Lord, I pray that you would just show us the reason why 1 Kings 5 is in the Bible, Lord, for we understand that the entire Bible is inherent, and every part of it is there for a purpose, inspired by the Holy Spirit, Lord, through the writers of Kings, Lord. And I pray that you would just give me the words and the strength and the wisdom to share what this message is. And I thank you for giving me this opportunity to preach, Lord. Amen. So first, before we really go into this, we need some context. First is, who is Hiram? Who is Hiram, king of Tyre? Hiram is first mentioned in 2 Samuel 5:11. We're not going to turn there. But basically what goes on is he talks to David and says, hey, David, I am here and I'm willing to build your house, the palace of David. And so Hiram provides wood, the cedars of Lebanon, for David. This starts a relationship, a political relationship that lasts and is great until David dies and then Solomon comes. And so thus this relationship lasts again, that Solomon and Hiram are still in this political friendship where the two kingdoms are stable with each other. So who is Lebanon? Hiram, king of Tyre, is in Lebanon and basically one of the rulers of Lebanon. It's not exactly clear how that rulership is going there, but we're just going to say that he is a ruler of that area. Lebanon, that he's in control of, is at the northern border of Israel. And it's important to understand that the area of Lebanon is mentioned in the the Abrahamic covenant. If we turn to Deuteronomy 1:7-8, which is a reference to the Abrahamic covenant, which is now being given to Moses, it reads this: Turn and set your journey, and go to the hill country of the Amorites, and to all their neighbors in the Arabah, in the hill country and in the lowland, and the Negev, and by the seacoast, the land of the Canaanites, and Lebanon, as far as the great river, the river Euphrates. Basically, the promised land includes Lebanon. Lebanon is being included in this promised land, meaning it's in the Abrahamic covenant. What was promised to Abraham, it was also being promised to Moses. So in the future kingdom of Israel, Lebanon will be a part of it. However, in addition, in 1 Joshua 12:7, we read of Lebanon being taken. When Joshua invades, he has all of these Israelite victories, and then it speaks of the kings that were killed from these victories. Now these are the kings of the land whom Joshua and the sons of Israel defeated beyond the Jordan towards the west, from Baal-Gadad in the valley of Lebanon, even as far as Mount Helek. So basically saying that Lebanon is defeated by Israel. So it seems that Lebanon is under control of Israel. However, if we look in Joshua 13:5, the very next chapter, something is up. Joshua here is dividing the land that has been conquered to the tribes of Israel, and he says that there are lands that have been defeated, as in the king has been killed, but Israel has not invaded, meaning the native people still live there. It is politically under the control of Israel, but it's not actually in their land. And one of these lands, in verse 5, is Lebanon, and the land of the Gebelite, and all of Lebanon. So Lebanon, what Joshua is saying here is Lebanon is not under control of Israel. There are not Israelites in Lebanon, and he's saying this land needs to be taken so that the promised land is fulfilled, so the Abrahamic covenant is fulfilled, so that we have all of the land that God has promised to us. However, if we look at Solomon's kingdom, we see that's not true, because if Hiram, king of Tyre, is in control of Lebanon, then obviously Israel is not in control of Lebanon. And here we have another proof that because Lebanon is not in control, not under the control of Israel, it is not being fulfilling the Abrahamic covenant. There's something that happens between Joshua 13 and what we're reading today, 1 Kings 5, that Lebanon is never taken completely under Israelite control. However, Israel is politically more powerful than Lebanon, and they are in a subordinate relationship where Lebanon is below Israel and Israel is superior. And that is why this relationship is able to happen, is because Hiram and Solomon have this relationship. Israel is in control, but they're not in the land, and they're not directly in control. Political stuff going on, but really the point of it is to say is that the Abrahamic covenant is not being fulfilled, and this is another proof of that. So, Lebanon, northern border of Israel, politically under Israel, but not part of Israel. Great. The third context we have to understand, which we've already read, 1 Kings 1 through 4, is that there is peace. There is peace. And the reason that there's peace is because David fought so hard, and he had all of those wars, and he did all of those battles with the power of God, and he took control and kept Israel safe. The minute David dies, Solomon then kills the last offenders to David's kingship. He kills Joab, he kills Adonijah, he kills Shimei, and so forth, removing these characters so that there is total peace in Israel. So there's peace in Israel, and there's Lebanon, and there's Hiram. And so what is going on in this passage? Hiram comes down from Lebanon, and he says to Solomon, "Hey Solomon, David said that you were going to build the house of Yahweh. Is this true? I want to provide the wood." And Solomon says, "Yes, behold, I intend to build a house for the name of Yahweh my God, as Yahweh spoke to David my father, saying, your son, whom I will set on your throne in your place, he will build the house for my name." Once again, referencing the Davidic covenant, this idea that Solomon, in a sense, believes he is fulfilling the Davidic covenant. He's not, but he, in a sense, feels he is. To what extent, it's unclear, but he does feel that the promise to build the eternal house is this house here. But as we'll see later, that is not true. So Hiram comes to Solomon, and Solomon says, "Yes, let's do it. Let's build this house." And then we have a long description of how it's going to go down. Basically, the Lebanon people are going to cut down the trees. They're going to build them into rafts. They're going to send those rafts down the sea to Israel. Then people in Israel are going to take the rafts. They're going to disassemble them, and they're going to build the temple. Tons of details put into it, but that's basically what's going on. And at the end of the chapter, we also see that there's stones of Lebanon that are also being recovered. And this idea that Lebanon really is a place of natural beauty and resources that are being able to be used by Israel. All of this is important. So, as we look at this passage, it's easy just to go, well, this is a story, just collecting the stuff so we can build the temple. So what's in the temple? Let's go to chapter 6. Let's get cracking. But I believe that there are some details in here that we just have to look at. And that's why we're going to spend the next 30 minutes really diving into these details. And there's 3 of them that I want to look at. The first being the Gentile inclusion. I feel that there is a foreshadowing to the Gentile inclusion. If we look to the Old Testament, even farther back in the Old Testament, to the Torah, we see that when Israel built the tabernacle, who was really building it? It was the Israelites. And the Israelites alone. Only the Israelites. And even so more, only the Levites could build certain parts. Only the Levites could carry certain things. There was a lot of specificity to show that it was only Israel that was the people of God. And it was only the Levites that were his special elect who could really do these things. But here, there's a massive contrast. In the building of the temple, it's very different. We see the mention of Gentiles over and over and over again. And it's important to understand that this is not to say that Solomon is doing it wrong. It's just a different point that's being made by God. I do believe that Solomon, everything he's doing here is correct. However, there is a difference. So let's look at that. Verse 1 mentions Hiram, king of Tyre. He is not an Israelite. Verse 6 reads, "Now therefore command that they cut for me cedars from Lebanon. Who knows how to cut timbers like the Sidonians. Those are not Israelites. Verse 9 reads, my servants will bring them down from Lebanon, the Lebanon people, to the sea, and I will make them into rafts. This is Hiram speaking, to go by sea to the place where you direct me, and I will have them broken up there, and you shall carry them away. Once again, these are not Israelite people. These are talking about the people of Lebanon. And then verse 18 reads, so Solomon's builders and Hiram's builders and the Gebulites cut them. Once again, mentioning people who are not Israelites. There are non-Israelites who are building this temple. And if we turn to 2 Chronicles 2:17 through 18, we see this again. 2 Chronicles 2:17 through 18 is basically Kings 2.0. It tells the same story just from a different viewpoint. We're not going to study it in detail because I feel that, as I said, it's literature. So 2 Chronicles and 1 Chronicles just have a different viewpoint. They're sharing the same story, but there's different points that are to be made. However, we are going to be referencing certain parts of it, just like we are today. So 2 Chronicles 2:17 through 18, talking about the same story, reads this. Solomon numbered all the aliens, basically those who are non-Israelites, who were in the land of Israel, following the census which his father David had taken, and 153,600 were found. He appointed 70,000 of them to carry loads, and 80,000 to quarry stones in the mountains, and 3,600 supervisors to make the people work. So 153,600 people are living in Israel who are non-Israelites, are helping build the temple. It's this idea that there are non-Israelites allowed to be in God's plan. It is the Gentile inclusion. If we understand Revelations 15:4, which talks about that all nations will come to glorify Jesus at the end of times, this is really a foreshadowing to that kingdom to come, that Jesus will be glorified not just by the Israelites, but by all of his chosen people. If we remember from Timmy's study in Romans, the idea of Israelites will be cut out and Gentiles will be grafted in, that they're all the people of Israel. And it's also important to understand the context that Solomon's kingdom is in political power. If we remember from chapter 4, people are coming to Solomon to hear his wisdom, to see his glory. Now they're able to see his God as well at the temple. They're able to come and glorify him as well. And what does Hiram do? He does exactly this. He says, when Hiram heard the words of Solomon, he rejoiced greatly and said, blessed be Yahweh today, who has given to David a wise son over his great people. Now it's unclear if he's glorifying the Lord, the God of Israel, as just the God of Israel and he has his own gods, or if he's glorifying him as the only God. However, I do believe that looking at the details that Hiram really does believe that Yahweh is the one and only true God. And what is going on here is that in the creation of the temple, people like Hiram are coming to believe. People who are non-Israelites, Gentiles, being brought into the kingdom of the Lord. And so this is our first detail, the Gentile inclusion. People who are not of Israel being allowed to be part of God's plan. Our next detail is the stones of Lebanon. The stones of Lebanon. As you see, we're going to skip pretty much to the very end. And I have a point for this because I wanted to get to the last detail, which really encompasses the whole chapter last. The stones of Lebanon reads in 17 through 18. And the king commanded, and they quarried great stones, costly stones, to lay the foundation of the house with cut stones. So Solomon's builders and Hiram's builders and the Gebulites cut them and prepared the timbers and the stones to build the house. These are the most costly, the greatest stones Solomon could have found. And it's this idea that Solomon has chosen the best for the temple. He has chosen the best stones, the most costly stones, the prettiest stones to lay the foundation. And if we look throughout the Bible, we know that stones or rocks are a symbol for a strong foundation. And the temple is going to have a strong foundation. And it's also, I believe, foreshadowing the temple to come, the church that has the foundation of Jesus, a much stronger, more costly stone. Jesus, who is the cornerstone of the church. And that by focusing on these stones, we understand that the temple, which is going to be built in chapter 6, is a temple that in the future will be made out of a foundation much greater than these stones, one of Jesus Christ. He will be the foundation of the millennial kingdom and the eternal kingdom in heaven, where the church will be the bride of Christ, able to glorify him forever. And so I do believe that including these stones at the end of this passage, it's reminding us, readers who have read the New Testament, that we know there is a king to come. There is a church to come that will have a greater foundation. And this brings us to our third detail, and this one we're going to spend a lot more time on, and this is the Cedars of Lebanon. So we first saw the Gentile inclusion and how the Gentile inclusion in the end of times is foreshadowed and in the creation of the church. We saw the stones of Lebanon and how that talks about Jesus' coming and him being the foundation of the church. And now we see the Cedars of Lebanon. And these cedars are really mentioned all throughout chapter 5. Because really what is going on but Solomon asking Hiram, hey, you have some trees and I'd love to see your trees. So it's important to understand that, really interesting, on the Lebanon flag today, the trees, the cedars of Lebanon, are actually on their flag. And there still are cedars of Lebanon in Lebanon. So these trees that they're talking about still are around. There's not as many of them, but they still do exist. And I actually have a picture of these trees that I'd like to show. One sec. There you go. That's what they look like. They're these massive, gorgeous, powerful trees that are pretty much the best trees that Solomon could have found. They're known for their sturdiness, their fragrance, they look good. I can't remember the word that I was going to say. I'll be honest with you. But just they're foundational for building strong buildings. And at this time, trees really were one of the greatest uses for building. If we looked at chapter 6, we see that these cedars are used over and over again. Verse 9 of chapter 6 says, so he built the house and finished it, and he covered the house with beams and planks of cedar. He also built the stories against the whole house, each 5 cubits high, and they were fastened in the house with timbers of cedar. House with boards of cypress, boards of cedar. Over and over again, I'm just reading, moving forward. There was cedar on the house within, carved in the shape of gourds and open flowers, always cedar, and there was no stone seen. And even more, in the palace of Solomon, he also builds this other house, literally called the Forest of Lebanon, showing the power of these trees, that they're really an important building block for Solomon's temple and his kingdom at large. They're awesome trees. They're still in Lebanon, a sign of their natural beauty and power. And I'm going to get rid of this picture so you can see more of me. Sorry. There we go. I just really wanted to show you that picture so you just have it in your mind what these trees kind of looked like. And at the time, there were a ton of them. Forest of Lebanon, tons of these trees. And now today, there's not as much of them. And there's a reason for that. And I'll get into that. So what are these trees? They're mentioned 71 times in the Old Testament. And I would argue that out of all of these 71 times, they become this sort of motif, a symbol that's mentioned over and over again, and that the core of that motif, the core of that symbol is here in chapter 5, because of that I know of, this is the greatest place where they're mentioned. They're not mentioned more than here. There's so much detail to put into how they are transported to building of the temple, and then chapter 6, there's so much detail shown in how the temple is built out of these trees. So I would argue that this 3 chapters, is the midpoint of all of this forest of trees, these 71 references. And what I'd like to do is figure out what this symbol is. And I'll be honest with you, it took me a long time to figure out what these trees really symbolize. And so I hope that I can give you a general idea of what their importance is. So out of those 71 times, we're going to look at a couple verses, more than a couple, but we're going to try to figure out what's the importance of these trees. So we're going to jump verse to verse throughout the Old Testament and get some information on the cedars of Lebanon, our third detail of chapter 5. So our first reference we're going to turn to is Psalm 92:12. Psalm 92:12. Psalm 92:12 reads this: "The righteous man will flourish like the palm tree. He will grow like a cedar in Lebanon, planted in the house of Yahweh. They will flourish in the courts of your God, our God. They will still yield fruit in old age. They shall be full of sap and very green, to declare that Yahweh is upright. He is my rock, and there is no unrighteousness in him." From verses like this, we see that these trees are really a symbol of righteousness, power, beauty, majesty, strong holding, a foundation that will last for a long period of time. They're also mentioned along with the rock of the Lord that I was just talking about earlier, how Jesus is the rock of the church, and the stones of Lebanon are the rock of this temple. They are shown that they are of Yahweh, and they will flourish, and they will yield fruit. These are powerful trees, signs of majesty and beauty, and just gorgeous trees. And we also see that they are a gift of God to the Israelites, because God gives these trees to Israel. For if we remember that Lebanon is right on the north of Israel, easily accessible by Israel, that they are given as a natural gift to Israel for it to be used. Psalm 104:16 reads thus. Psalm 104:16. "The trees of Yahweh drink their fill, the cedars of Lebanon which he planted." This idea that the trees are a gift from God, a sign of his favor towards them. Now, what's very interesting, and this is really what caused me to struggle over these trees, is there are verses in the Bible that talk about how evil people are described as the trees of Lebanon. So I was a little confused. For example, King Sennacherib, the Assyrian king, is called a tree of Lebanon. And I'm like, wait, but I thought it was a sign of God's favor. And this is really how I was able to understand it, is that these trees are a symbol of might, of power, of majesty, of beauty. And the fact that God gave them to Israel is a sign of his favor. So the fact that the Assyrian king was seen as one of these trees is to say that yes, he had power, yes, he had strength. But when God destroyed this king, and as we will see, God destroys these trees all throughout the Bible, it is a sign that God can take away these blessings, and God can remove his favor from these people who he has given favor to them. So these trees are a sign of power and beauty. They are a gift of God to the Israelites, a sign of his favor towards them. And they are a sign of strength. And so when they are taken away, it is a sign of much greater power, of much greater judgment. And now what I want to do is look through the history of these trees and the creation of the temple to see the full story of the cedars of Lebanon and their use in the temple. So our first introduction is 1 Kings 5, obviously. That's where we're at, where the trees are taken to build the first temple. And this is a great thing that Solomon does, that people are doing right for the Lord and things are going well. However, over the course of the next 400 years, Israel and Judah fall further and further into evil. And we see in 2 Kings 25:9, judgment from the Lord. 2 Kings 25:9 reads thus: Nebuchadnezzar burned the house of Jerusalem. He burned the house of Yahweh, the king's house, and all the houses of Jerusalem, even every great house he burned with fire. See, this is what I love about the cedars of Lebanon is, yes, they are a sign of power and strength, and they are sturdy, but they are trees and they are wood. And so their weakness is fire. And this fire that comes from Nebuchadnezzar is not necessarily Nebuchadnezzar's fire. It is the Lord's judgmental fire against Israel. For they sin, and their temple is burned to the ground. The cedars of Lebanon are destroyed. But after they go into Babylon in captivity, after judgment is shown to them, God's favor returns, and they are brought back into Israel. If we turn to Ezra 3:7, Ezra was one of the main figures in the time of Israel following the return from exile. They build the second temple. And Ezra 3:7 reads this: And they gave money to the masons and carpenters, and food and drink and oil to the Sidonians and to the Tyrians to bring cedar wood from Lebanon to the sea at Joppa, according to the permission they had from Cyrus, king of Persia. How familiar does this sound? It's the same idea going on here, and it is a sign that God's favor is returning to the Israelites, that power and beauty and majesty are being returned to Israel, that they are returning to God. They are returning to Him, and He is returning to them. And so now we have hope. We have hope that Israel will be restored eternally, and maybe this is it. Maybe this is the eternal temple, but it is not. For if we turn to Zechariah 11, 1 through 2, which is where we're going to hold for a hot second, we will see that this is not true. This prophecy, and I'll get more into detail of why it's so, is the foreshadowing of the burning of the second temple. Open your doors, O Lebanon, that a fire may feed on your cedars. Wail, O Cypress, for the cedar has fallen, because the glorious trees have been destroyed. Wail, O oaks of Bashan, for the impenetrable forest has come down. There is a sound of the shepherd's wail, for their glory is ruined. There is a sound of the young lion's roar, for the pride of Jordan is ruined. And so this prophesies the burning of the second temple. So when does this actually happen? Well, it's actually not mentioned in the Bible. This is actually a prophecy that happens after Jesus' first advent. And we're going to get more details about why this happens in Zechariah. If we move forward to verse 7, we read about Jesus' first advent. And this is where my Christmas sermon kind of comes in here. So I pastured the flock doomed to slaughter, hence the afflicted of the flock. And I took for myself 2 staffs, the one I called favor, and the other I called union. So I pastured the flock. Then I annihilated the 3 shepherds in 1 month, for my soul was impatient with them, and their soul also was weary of me. Then I said, I will not pasture you. What is to die, let it die, and what is to be annihilated, let it be annihilated. And let those who are left eat one another's flesh. I took my staff favor and cut it in pieces to break my covenant which I had made with all the people. So it was broken on that day. And thus the afflicted of the flock who were watching me realized that it was the word of Yahweh. I said to them, if it is good in your sight, give me my wages, but if not, never mind. So they weighed out 30 shekels of silver as my wages. These are the 30 shekels of silver that serve as a prophecy for Judas, who takes these 30 shekels of silver as the price of Jesus. See, what these verses are really talking about is the rejection of Jesus. Jesus comes in to save Israel, and they treat him as just worth 30 shekels of silver. 30 shekels of silver that Judas uses to crucify Jesus. And Jesus' response to this, after saving his people, the greatest miracle of all, the crucifixion, resurrection of our Lord Jesus Christ, is judgment. And that is what Zechariah is speaking of, is that there will be judgment. For Jesus went into the second temple in real time. It's referenced in the Gospels. He goes in there and he does many things. He throws across the tables where they were trading and selling. He reads Isaiah there. He was at the second temple. It is past that, when he ascends into heaven, that 40 years later in 70 AD, judgment comes upon Israel. For Israel rejected Jesus. And it is here that favor is removed, that union is removed, that Judah and Israel are split apart and there is destruction. And what happens, not referenced here, but is referenced in real history, that is people agree with. I literally looked it up on Wikipedia and they were like, yes, this is a true thing that happened. It's not biblical, it's real. Basically what happens in 70 AD is the Romans invade Jerusalem and they burn the city to the ground. They burn down the temple. And I have here a first account, people who were there, from Josephus Flavius, who talks about this burning of the temple that Zechariah foreshadows. So first I'm going to read Zechariah 11, 1 through 3 one more time, and then I'm going to read this recording of that time. Open your doors, O Lebanon, that a fire may feed on your cedars. Wail, O Cypress, for the cedar has fallen, because the glorious of trees have been destroyed. Wail, O oaks of Bashan, for the impenetrable forest has come down. And now, 40 years after Jesus is rejected, the Romans come down from the north through Lebanon into Israel. And there were the war cries of the Roman legions as they swept onwards en masse, the yells of the rebels encircled by fire and sword, the panic of the people who, cut off above, fled into the arms of the enemy, and their shrieks as they met their fate. The cries on the hill blended with those of the multitudes in the city below, and now many people who were exhausted and tongue-tied as a result of hunger, when they beheld the temple on fire, found strength once more to lament and wail. Perea and the surrounding hills added their echoes to the deafening din, but more horrifying than the din were the sufferings. The Temple Mount, everywhere enveloped in flames, seemed to be boiling over from its base, yet the blood seemed more abundant than the flames, and the numbers of the slain greater than those of the slayers. The soldiers climbed over heaps of bodies as they chased the fugitives. Josephus Flavius. See, Christmas time, which we celebrate every single year, is a glorious time to celebrate the birth of Jesus. But it is important to understand that if we reject Jesus, there is great judgment. The John MacArthur Study Bible, speaking of this prophecy, states that in 70 AD, it is said that over 1 million Jews were slaughtered in that assault, and almost 500,000 in subsequent Roman attacks in Israel. And this is terrible. And this reading here of Josephus Flavius matches where it says that they starved. Let those who are left eat one another's flesh. They were so hungry that they literally ate each other. Basically, no food was let in so that the people would starve. These things did happen, and it was a judgment from God, and it sounds so terrible. But what I would argue that is even more terrible is to see the Christmas miracle of Jesus coming, born in a manger, humbled to the cross, and then to say no. No, we want him crucified, and I don't even want to believe that he's even real. And that's where we are now. We've passed crucifying him. We want something even worse than that, is to reject that he's even real, reject that any of this even happened. But I say this, that there is judgment to come. For the Cedars of Lebanon, these great foundations show us that no matter how strong you are, how much you try to fight against Jesus, how much you try to ignore the Christmas miracle, he will burn the trees to the ground. But there's one more spot in the Bible where these trees are mentioned that I want to look at here. And that's Isaiah 60:13 and the millennial kingdom, the third temple, the final temple. The glory of Lebanon will come to you, the juniper, the box tree, and the cypress together, to beautify the place of my sanctuary, and I shall make the place of my feet glorious. There will be a temple created in the millennial kingdom that will surpass the temples before and will last forever and will fulfill the Davidic covenant. It will be the house eternal. This is the kingdom we look forward to. But if we remember what we have looked at in the time of the second advent of Jesus, we know that there is so much judgment to come for those who do not believe. For those who do believe, God will have favor with them. Like the cedars of Lebanon, he will bring majesty and beauty. But for those who do not believe, fear Zechariah 11:1-3, for he will do it again. He will send in his armies. He will destroy. He will do rightful justice. This is the Christmas miracle that we were saved from this. But it is also the Christmas truth that Judas valued Jesus as only 30 shekels of silver and betrayed him. And we betray him as well. But he saved us from that. This is the Christmas miracle that I hope we dwell on. And as we turn back to 1 Kings 5, it's important to understand that God has chosen Lebanon as this place of beauty. as a gift to Israel, that it has these beautiful trees, has these stones, and this beauty is to be used for his service, and that all are welcome to the temple of Yahweh. All may witness his beauty, for the eternal temple really is Jesus Christ, the eternal majesty, the eternal beauty, the eternal power that we can look to. And if we believe in him, if we believe in the Christmas miracle, then there is hope for salvation. And I pray that as we go towards Christmas, we not only remember the beauty of Christmas morn, but we remember the horror of the crucifixion that we lovingly can call Good Friday, for those who believe in him. But for those who do not believe in him, remember 40 years later when the Romans came in and burned the cedars of Lebanon to the ground. And I want to end on one last verse that speaks about these cedars of Lebanon that I think can really tie us in to why 1 Kings 5 is where it is. Hosea 14, 5-9 reads thus, speaking of the end of times, I will be like the dew to Israel. He will blossom like the lily, and he will take root like the cedars of Lebanon. His shoots will sprout, and his beauty will be like the olive tree, and his fragrance like the cedars of Lebanon. Those who live in his shadow will again raise grain, and they will blossom like the vine. His renown will be like the wine of Lebanon. I'm going to skip to verse 8b. I am like a luxuriant cypress. From me comes your fruit. Whoever is wise, let him understand these things. Whoever is discerning, let him know them. For the ways of Yahweh are right, and the righteous will walk in them, but transgressors will stumble in them. As we look at 1 Kings 5, understanding the full course of the Bible, I feel that its importance is to teach us that the temple we're about to read about in 1 Kings 6 is a temporary temple. It is not the fulfiller of the Davidic covenant, nor is the second temple. For each of them is a sign of God's favor coming on those who believe and God's judgment coming on those who turn from him. But it is also a foreshadowing of something to come, one who will come who will be the eternal temple, and that is Jesus Christ. And that in the second advent we can know that there will be peace, there will be hope. And as Hosea showed us, that we should look to his righteousness and his wisdom, who has more wisdom than Solomon ever had. And so I feel that the point of 1 Kings 5 is to show us why this temple is so important. And this temple is so important because it's not the final temple. It is a human attempt at making a home for God. And it is a great thing, but it does fall, and so do the temples after it. But there is a kingdom to come that will never fall. One that, yes, is marked in beauty, but is also marked in blood. Let us turn to his righteousness, turn to his wisdom, and glory in the eternal temple, Jesus Christ.